So welcome to this trialogue, as we're calling it. I'm here with my business partner, Gina Hayden, and we are spending some time today with Tom Greenwood. Tom is someone I've known for a good few years now. He's a colleague and a friend. He is really inspiring and has many beautiful and interesting elements and aspects to share around conscious leadership. He runs and has for 15 years run a WordPress web design agency specializing in sustainable elements. Set it up really to explore how to run a business differently. Was one of the very early B Corp members. So I'm delighted to be with you here today, Tom, to talk really and just to explore conscious leadership. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin.
Would love to just start off by perhaps asking you the term conscious leadership. What does it mean to you? Why do you see it as important at this point in the world? Yeah, anything you want to share?
Yeah, well, I think to me it's about like going deeper than the surface. I think a lot of leadership in any type of organization is often very operational. It's just about getting stuff done. And actually, I think we're at a point in history where, you know, if the world is very dysfunctional in many ways, both sort of on the environmental side, but also socially, economically. You know, there's a lot of things that just kind of aren't working, and a lot of those are stemming from the fact that we've been approaching everything from this very kind of mechanical, practical perspective and way of working. And I feel like we really need to sort of take a step back and look within ourselves about, like, you know, what are we as humans? What are we trying to do here? Like, how do we really want to live? How do we want to relate to each other? How do we want to relate to the world and the environment that we live in? And ask ourselves those deeper questions and build deeper connections with each other, with the environment, and see how, like, you know, I run a business. In my case, it's like it's trying to figure out, how does a business fit into all of that? And I don't claim to have the answers now, but I think that's part of it, is actually being prepared to go on that journey and try and explore those things, of this sort of this weird juxtaposition of that fact that we are these kind of very complex creatures in a very complex world, and there's something really deep and meaningful to that, but we're actually living in a world that's very mechanical, and actually we need to kind of dive in and see how we realign the world with what we really are.
And when did you start on this journey yourself then, of thinking more deeply and consciously?
I think, well, to be honest, I mean, really, when I was a teenager, I started feeling quite strongly that the world didn't make any sense, and that the things that you're taught to kind of aspire to a certain type of life, and it just didn't feel right to me. It sort of felt like there was more to life than just the kind of generic, you know, you need to get these qualifications and you need to get this type of job because that's like the respectable type of job, and then, you know, do all the usual things. And I felt like, actually, like, the really interesting stuff in life is exploring what is life about? You know, what are we as humans? Who am I? And I felt like there wasn't really much space for that in society. You know, it's a bit, it should be really normal. It should be like at the absolute core of what we're doing. And it, you know, I felt like a bit of a weirdo, even like trying to explore those things as a teenager. And that just really kind of just became a part of who I am. That, like, everything I was doing from that point onwards, in terms of trying to figure out where I wanted to go with my life, was really about asking those deeper questions and trying to find a path that felt like it was aligned with who I am and where I need to go. And that sort of just led me to organically to where I am now.
Amazing. So what strikes me as you're talking about that is, like, it's like it's like most of society's on autopilot. It's like we're just playing out the conditioning that we grew up with in a certain way, living, racing, running at speed, without often stopping to ask these bigger questions.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
It sounds like you've been doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like society is sort of templated, and we're programmed to just operate within this template and follow predefined paths. And actually, we need to be looking and saying, well, okay, but like, what if we go off the path? What else is there? We have this very kind of narrow perspective.
Because if the path made sense, it would be okay to be on the autopilot path, right? But
absolutely.
I think there's so much, but increasingly so, that doesn't make sense to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I do think we're at a weird point in history where, I mean, maybe every point in history has been weird. It's just my perspective that I'm here now. But we've got an ecological crisis, which is really an existential crisis for humanity, that we're sort of just charging blindly forwards into without really addressing. But we've also got, massive inequality. We've got a mental health crisis. There's all sorts of things going on that just show that, like, the system that we're in and going through the motions and just blindly following it isn't working. So yeah, we need to kind of explore what else is off that path. What other paths are there?
Thank you. Do you want to add something, Gina?
Yeah, I do. So I want to take us off in a slightly different direction then.
Yeah.
I was really curious about you looking at how you bridge between business and what we're talking about. So we'd love you to talk to what are some of the things that you've discovered about how to bring more conscious awareness into business at a very practical level, because I don't think that we know enough about it, or people are still discovering it. And I do think that the more we can bring the examples or bring it alive for people, the more there is for people to replicate in their own businesses. So we'd love to hear about, like, what have you discovered in trying to join these two worlds?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things I've discovered is just how complex humans are. And when you're trying to run a business in a way is a machine, not literally a mechanical machine, but it is effectively a machine that has inputs and outputs. And if you look at it that way, it gets you so far. But actually, like, in running a business, what you realize is that, like, nothing's that simple. And particularly, like, the people within it are, like, they're real humans. They are deeply complex. And actually, there's real opportunities to not only perform better as a business in a conventional sense, but also to actually give people good lives, have, like, a fulfilling experience of being within a company, within a team. When we invest time in actually exploring that kind of deeper human side of ourselves and each other. And so that's something that I've been trying to sort of bring into our team over a number of years, is trying to put that conversation on the table, that it's not just like me thinking about it, but actually, like, try to get everybody in the team thinking about themselves more deeply and thinking about how they relate to each other more deeply, and the world around them. And one of the things I did a few years ago was hired in somebody, and Chris Hardy, as an in-house coach, but not a coach in the sense of, like, it's not about, like, we got to hit our sales targets. It's a coach in terms of trying to help us individually look within ourselves and actually, like, go on a personal development journey in the truest sense, as well as, like, facilitating us as a group to relate to each other better, understand each better on a kind of quite a deep level. And that's been really fulfilling, really interesting. And I think it's sort of brought the company to life as an organism rather than a machine, which is, been really good.
And following on from that, so that's really good thinking about internal.
Yeah.
And I wish people did more of that. And things like the products that you've been creating, the kind of B Corp side of it,
Yeah.
the impact in the world. Can you speak a bit about some of those changes that you've created that means that you're living in alignment with what's important to you? It'd be really great to hear how you've done that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so right since when we started the business 15 years ago, we've had the kind of the concept of sustainability. And I know sustainability is sort of a vague word, but environmental responsibility kind of at the core of what we want to do as a company, and that's really permeated through like every strand of what we're doing. So there's the operational side of trying to explore how can we actually just function as a business in an environmentally responsible way, and some of that's fairly standard about energy efficiency and so on, but it also includes, you know, seeing how we can push those boundaries in ways like, for example, we've had a no-fly policy since about 7 years ago, where we literally, it's just you can't fly anywhere for business. We'll find a way of operating without that. And that's very unusual. And that's actually something that a lot of other businesses have been really intrigued by and are curious to learn about, as well as like helping our team explore how they could, you know, make their home working more energy efficient. So there's the operational side of really just trying to constantly explore, like, how could we go further? There's the client side of actually saying, well, what is the impact of the work that we're doing? Because that's really probably the biggest thing, is saying that we're a web design agency. That's what we do. And anyone who's paying for a website thinks that somehow they're going to get a return on that investment. They're spending money because they think it's going to help them achieve their goals. So what are their goals that you're helping them achieve? Are those goals aligned with your own values? Are they, if we help them achieve their goals, is that going to help push the world in the direction we want it to go? Or is that going to push the world in a direction that is like misaligned and not where we want it to go? And that's been really fascinating to actually explore that and explore how actually it's, you know, you can have some top level principles of like, well, we want to work on these types of things and not these types of things. But it also makes you realize just how complex everything is and how so many things are in this murky gray area in the middle. And you have to really challenge yourself to understand, well, like, why does this project not feel right? Even though on paper, maybe it actually sounds quite good. And also to challenge yourself on things like, you know, someone's offering you money to do a project, and you've got salaries to pay, and, you know,
right. It's very real world, isn't it?
It's very real world. And there's also, you know, it makes you learn about yourself, about like, oh, am I being like, I'm feeling myself being tempted here, but there's something in my gut is saying that maybe this isn't what we should be doing. And we come up against that a lot, but it's a really interesting exploration. And we, like, you know, over the years, we've turned down over £1 million worth of work, which is no small number. And but the consequence is that I think that it's been much more fulfilling. We're working on things that we feel are really, you know, making a positive difference in the world. It helps us attract the type of people who we want to work with. So we actually have a really great team who are really aligned. But it also helps us attract more of the type of things we want to do, because then people see that, oh, these guys really have integrity. And if we're an organization that's really trying to do something positive in the world, then actually we want to work with people who truly get it. They truly care. And I think that's been really powerful. And then the third sort of pillar of that, like, environmental responsibility, has been a journey we've been on over the last few years of exploring the environmental impact of digital technology, because something that when we started the company we weren't aware of. When we found out about it, we realized that no one was even talking about it. Like, we struggled to find anybody in our industry who knew anything about it. Everyone was like, well, digital technology doesn't have any environmental impact. It's virtual, you know, it's in the cloud, it doesn't really exist. And so that's been a fascinating journey of just challenging ourselves to say, well, we can't make these sorts of assumptions. We need to actually find out what the truth is, and then and then we need to share that knowledge as widely as possible and inspire people to actually want to learn about it, want to do something about it. Because there's no point, anything to do with, like, if you want to contribute to a positive future, whether that's sort of environmentally or socially, there's no point just doing your little thing and not telling anybody else about it. Like, it needs to be something that actually becomes normal. And so a big part, another sort of challenge then is, like, you make big investments in, like, researching things and learning things and developing new skills and technology, but then you also want to give it away because you want everyone to be doing it and you want everyone to know. So so hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of some of the things.
It's just wonderful. I just want to play back, the being clear. I'm hearing being clear about your values of what you want to see in the world, and linking to a purpose for your company, and taking a stand to make that purpose live, which comes into your decision making as a leader. Yeah. And part of that purpose sounds like that it's not just, yes, you have to decide, do I do this business or not? Do we do this business or not? And that's £1 million, big numbers. But also then how you are, through the work you're doing, enabling, expanding the effect outwards. So other people, like your clients, to talk about what you're doing so other people can do it, expands that positive effect. So you're really starting it and it's really expanding outwards. It's lovely to hear you describe that. Yeah, thank you.
So I've got a question to follow on from that. I certainly get that. I love the following your values deeply, and if we all did that in the world, then the world would be a different place. The fact that you've tuned into what you do value and what is important to you to start off with is the important part of the work, and then living it is equally important. The bit that I wanted to explore with you, Tom, was with your employees, with the people that work with you and with your clients. To what extent do you push? It might be the wrong word, but push your views. Like, to what extent do you share and stand for your views on what's required? Versus, because people are at different levels of their journey, at different levels of consciousness, and I'm constantly wrangling with myself, on this, which is, to what extent am I a stand for saying, here's what I think, here's what I'm going to do, here's what we should do, and where that meets bringing people on their journey for where they're at.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And it ties back in with what I was saying about how there's this murky gray area around, like, what, for example, looking at a project and saying, well, does this align with our values? Is this a project we want to work on? And sometimes that's quite clear cut, in the sense that if you're working with people where you're really on the same page and you know that you share their values, then you don't necessarily need to bring them on that journey. And similarly, from a recruitment point of view, in an ideal world, we want people who get it already so that we're all pulling in the same direction. But then there's always this question of, like, yes, but what about everybody else? Like, there's an opportunity to actually bring people along with us and learn from others by getting other perspectives of people who maybe not at the same stage as us. And it's, there's no perfectly right answer, I don't think, about exactly where that line is. But I think the key is to sort of try and be honest with yourself about why you're entering into this relationship or why you're doing this project. So in our case, when we're building websites, for example, we tend to be fairly hard-nosed about what type of websites we want to build, what they're promoting, because the biggest impact is going to be that impact of what they're trying to what they're trying to achieve in the world. So if we're not feeling entirely comfortable about that, then we tend to just back away. But equally, we'll work with a lot of people who maybe we wouldn't want to build a website for them, but we'll sort of work with them more on a consultancy basis to actually help educate them about, like, sustainability in the digital sector, and train their teams and do workshops with them and so on, to get them inspired and give them the tools they need to go on that journey themselves. And so that's sort of the way we've tried to find that balance, is by being quite clear about, like, okay, if we're going to be promoting something, it wants to be something that we're already happy with. But actually, if you're on the journey, we'll help you on the journey. And hopefully they'll end up in a good place. So yeah, I don't know if that entirely answers your question, Martin, but that's sort of the way I'm thinking about it.
I feel like it's about holding both positions in some way, being clear about who you are and what you stand for in the world, being passionate and inspiring about that, and yet meeting others where they're at.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree. And I also think that ties in with just being very open and transparent in sharing what we're doing as a company, because I feel like even if we don't necessarily do a project with somebody, if we can inspire people and share knowledge that gives them the ability to actually kind of make changes themselves, then that's amazing. That's what we want, because we're only a small company. Like, we're not gonna like change the world all on our own. Actually, like, our biggest impact is the ripples that we can create by actually getting people excited and interested in what we're doing, and giving them the tools to do things themselves.
So I think on that, I mean, I think there are some really important points coming out here. The generosity that you're referring to there, Tom, it's like the generosity of doing what's good for the most number of people. I think the conversation around values is a really interesting one, because values in and of themselves are pretty agnostic, right? You take the war in Ukraine and Russia, they have values. Russia has values.
Yeah.
It's just, what's the effect of the values? Islamic State will have values. They may even want to have a ripple effect out in the world. But to what effect? So I think it's the values. A take on it might be what we choose to prioritize, that we value, that actually has a positive impact on the greater good beyond ourselves. And I think it's the good and the generative that we're looking at, rather than just values, right? Because values could be being very firm in my own belief that everybody should be like me, which is a completely different conversation. So I think it also links to this: how do you gently stand for that, or sometimes not so gently, but allow people to be where they're at without demanding that they're different. That's not you doing, that's a kind of a broader question, I think. I once was interviewing somebody in the US who I would think of as a very conscious leader. And something she said was, she used to think, possibly she would say from her ego, that she would sort of need to develop everybody in a company. It was sort of part of her responsibility to draw them through. And she said she now just sort of talks about the importance of self-awareness and emotional intelligence and things, offers the opportunity, and people will pick up the mantle as and where they're ready for it. And that she then still stands firm on what it is that she stands for in the world, and which is connected to her purpose. So I'm adding that in because I think we can be inclined to talk about values, certainly in the companies I work with, as something that's just a good thing by nature. And I think it's worth a bit of an inquiry about, what do we mean by this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, well, there's a few things in there. That one is, some people's values might be that, that they, neoliberal capitalism, and that's something that they truly believe in as an ideology. And I think it's interesting to actually sometimes take a step back and try to understand other people's perspectives, even if you think that their values don't align with yours. Like, they have a perspective, and it makes sense to them. And actually, if we're all going to kind of move forward and create a positive future, whatever that means, we actually do need to all kind of explore it together, understand each other's perspectives, and sort of co-create that future. And I think that requires, like being more humble and being more open about, like, less attached to the concept of values as being like these fixed things, like there's some words that I'm attached to, and it's more about like a sense of direction and a sense of meaning in who you are and how you relate to others. I think,
no, I really feel that as well.
I think there's a huge, I'm thinking of the Barrett Values Center and the Barrett 7 levels of consciousness here also, because so at the lower levels, we might value our own self-esteem or money or security, but there seems to be a natural human journey to higher levels of consciousness, where actually the values, the higher we go on this journey, the values are all aligned, and there's values around the common good, love, kindness, responsibility, that seem to show up as common values the more we go on this personal journey.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think there are some sort of universal aspects of what it means to be human that, as we go higher up there, they are aligned. It's just it's more the practical stuff of like what do we think the actual practical solutions are, the ways of behaving that differ.
There's this lovely saying that goes, if you think you're enlightened, then hang out with some other people and you'll soon discover it's not that easy. So I think when you start, as you're pointing out, you start rubbing up against things. And I really like the point you're making around holding it lightly, because I mean, even Barrett's value, it's a construct, right? It's not a truth. So it's an interesting exploration, but it's not the truth. But then actually what's underneath that we're saying is there seems to be I think it's like a generative, and you've been talking about this, a movement from me out into we in the world. So everything you're talking about is actually, how do I ripple out? It's almost kind of Star Wars, right? Life versus dark. How do I ripple out generativeness and light in my actions in business, in your case, rather than fear and contraction? You're actually going for expansion. And what you're deciding, even your values are in the service of expansion. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think in that light, it's also this sense that we are all connected. In some ways, we're not separate from each other. We're all a part of the same universe. And trying to live in a way where we're serving the whole. And obviously, it's not always difficult. It's not always easy to know how to do that or what that even means in a particular situation. But I think if that's more the perspective that we're operating with, then hopefully that will lead us to a better place than when we're closed in and it's all kind of about protection and building walls and
believing we're separate.
Believing we're separate.
Love it. Love what you're saying.
And how do you balance your own individual needs, Tom, with serving a bigger cause? Do you find that a conflict? Is it all about focusing on the common good? How have you found that journey along the way?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think I have found that sometimes it's the two things are really aligned. I'm a big believer in sort of the principle of intrinsic motivation, that like when you really believe in something, even if it's hard work, it doesn't necessarily feel like hard work because there's this energy that comes from within that drives you to do it. You almost can't help yourself. But equally, sometimes actually, like, particularly running a business, for example, sometimes you genuinely just need a rest, but you have responsibilities. And those responsibilities are bigger than you, and sometimes there is a tension between those two things. And so I guess it is a bit of a dance in a way of trying to find that balance at any point in time, and just trying to, I guess, as I get older, trying to become more aware of where those tensions are emerging and say, well, okay, once you're aware of it, you can sort of more easily decide whether you need to change something, rather than just kind of plowing down the same course. And I think it's absolutely right. Sometimes you do need to really prioritize yourself in order that you're in a good position, that you're well, you're healthy, you've got the energy to then go and do things out in the world and make an impact in the world. I think if you always just try and do the outward stuff, eventually, you're at risk of burning yourself out, or maybe just not making the level of impact that you want to make.
Yeah.
So I love that. It comes back to awareness. It comes back to being conscious. And the more aware we are of what's going on for us inside, what's driving us, what's our thinking, what we're feeling, what we're picking up, the more awareness we have, the more we have the ability to be a considerate, conscious leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think this own oxygen mask before others.
Yes.
That you're referring to, really key, right? I heard it described as resource yourself before you resource others. Like, it's really home kitchen advice, but so true. So I wanted to ask you something. You referred earlier on to being a teenager and just thinking, well, this is a wacky world. I don't quite feel part of this. Just don't completely chime in. We're always really interested to hear. I think all of us are fascinated by, who are interested in waking up, are fascinated by what some of the experiences might have been that might have led to greater levels of awareness. And I don't know whether there are any with you where you saw something that was unexpected, or a piece of your identity fell away and you kind of went, those kind of waking up moments. You may just be one of those people who just had it from the day they were born, because that sometimes happens, or sometimes it's kind of through crisis or just life experience that sort of does it. And we'd love to hear what it was like for you.
Yeah, well, I think it was a mixture of things. And I don't think there was like one big moment or event as such, but I think the mixture of things. One was, in terms of my interest in the environment, it was when we were taught about the greenhouse effect at school. And I didn't really have any interest in the environment before that. And I was like a big car nut. I'd grown up, I was obsessed with like motor racing and cars, and couldn't wait to become 17 so I could get my driving license. And I thought I was going to be like, that was my thing. I was going to, when I grow up, I'm going to like have really cool cars and stuff. And then we had this geography lesson where they taught us about the greenhouse effect, and there was this diagram in the textbook that seemingly nobody else I went to school with remembers, but it was a map of the world now next to a map of the world in 100 years' time, once sea levels have risen. Now, I don't know how accurate that map was in hindsight, but it really shocked me that it's like, okay, the greenhouse effect is this sort of abstract concept. What does that really mean? But these two maps next to each other really made me think, crikey, like, this is something real. And I'm young, so the time frame that they're talking about is relevant to me. If I'm 13, then 100 years from now, okay, I probably won't be alive in 100 years, but I might be alive in 70, and by which time this will have taken effect. So that was a real catalyst for me of thinking like, okay, we really need to do something about this. And it kind of amused and confused my family that as it's got closer and closer to my 70th birthday, I became less and less interested in cars. By the time I got there, I was like, nah, not that bothered. More interested in bicycles now. But at the same time, kind of more like the human aspect. So that was the sort of the environmental piece. The human aspect was more that I think, you go through a big process of change in your teenage years. And, as before that, as a kid, it was just like, run of the mill, you just do your thing and you play with your friends and, you've got your interests, and it was all fine. But as I went through my teenage years and I could feel things changing inside me, and I started to get more of a sense of what I really cared about, what I was interested in, I also became increasingly aware that nobody else around me seemed to want to be interested in those things, want to have kind of deeper conversations, and also more aware of like this sort of impending like deadline of adulthood, that it's like this feeling that like, oh, like I'm actually on a conveyor belt, and I'm getting quite close to the end, and where we get tipped off into the bucket. And then, you know, in that kind of teenage period, looking at the adults around me and thinking, do I want the life they have? And, you know, I always feel bad saying that, because, you know, we come from a nice family, and, you know, they gave me a good childhood and so on, but it just didn't resonate with me. Like, they all seem to be really stressed out, and like there's a lot of tension in relationships, and they didn't really seem fulfilled and truly happy. And that just didn't sit well with me. I thought there's something doesn't make sense, because I'm being told that I should be on this conveyor belt, you know, doing all the standard things in order to follow that same path and do exactly the same things and have exactly the same life. And yet they don't seem happy. And that came to terrify me, is the truth. And I had a bit of it sort of in my early 20s, as I reached the end of the conveyor belt. I mean, I still don't know what you call it, but I mean, I'm some sort of nervous breakdown, which is really quite, that was, I guess, kind of like a big event, where I was just like, I need to get off the conveyor belt, but I don't know how. Yeah, and you know, here I am now. So somehow, I mean, I'm not saying I'm completely off the conveyor belt even now, but I feel like somehow I found, it was very messy, but somehow I've kind of muddled through and found a way of sort of carving my own path and living a life that felt right, felt in tune with who I am. Yeah.
And thank goodness you did. Yeah, that struggle between the internal world and the external world, and it can be a real struggle, as you describe, finding, how do I find my place, because I can't be this person, so but how do I take myself into the world?
Yeah,
thank goodness you did.
Yeah, it's inspiring to hear, and I think that's a key part that strikes me, is for us to become more conscious as human beings and as leaders. It's having those sort of moments, isn't it? Having that waking up in some way. So just coming towards the end, I've got one more question. Have you got anything else burning that
I
you
don't
would like to ask?
actually know.
Okay,
that's great.
Love your sharing, Tom. Just want to really appreciate you for your sharing and your authenticity, which just exudes from you in this conversation. What Gina and I are about, inspiring conscious leadership in this world.
Yeah.
That's our deep passion. We've both been on our own journeys of waking up multiple times in multiple ways. And so the question is, what advice have you got for others who are listening to this?
Yeah. Okay. I think my advice would be, because I think anybody listening to this is probably already on some sort of personal journey. There's already a curiosity. And I think my advice would be to just pause and listen. So like, listen to that inner voice. Like, what is it that you're really feeling? Where is it you're really wanting to go? Because I think we are living in this world where everything is kind of on a relatively fixed path, and it can feel very difficult to visualize what the alternatives might be. And I think sometimes it can feel like a barrier, like that if I don't know what the alternative is, then I'll just stay where I am. And actually, I think the first point is really just to say, I don't need to have all the answers. Actually, like, I might never have all the answers, but I need to start listening to myself and trusting myself, and following that kind of inner compass. And yeah, that would be my advice, would just be start having more faith in yourself.
Wonderful. Absolutely love that. And so the how have you found the journey of actually hearing your inner compass, listening to it, finding it, knowing what the compass is versus whatever else might be going on in your head?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of those things that's a constant exploration. And I'm sure that, 20, 30 years from now, hopefully I'm still around, I'll probably be thinking, crikey, when I did that interview back with Martin and Gina, I knew nothing. But I think it's about sort of testing, in a way, constantly testing, of trying to listen to that inner voice, and then trying to find the confidence to actually, feel that tension and actually step into it a little bit and say, I'm going to do something a little bit different, because I think my inner voice is telling me that I should go that way, and taking these little steps and testing it and seeing whether that then feels right once you've made that step. And I think it is this constant process of, it goes back to awareness of listening, acting, but then observing and listening again, so that you've got a feedback loop with yourself that you can then learn and become more in tune with yourself over time.
Wonderful, thank you. And it strikes me that we might even rename conscious leadership to inner compass leadership. It's kind of the same thing, really, right? Really, which is it's all about tuning into this deeper wisdom that we have inside us to guide us moment by moment, day by day, year by year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to act in the world, which Tom is a great example of, to take it out into the world as a result of the inner work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tom Greenwood. Really
inspiring.
appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
That's all right. Thanks for the great conversation.